Something I want to process kind of with you guys today is this idea of trust. No matter what you're doing in life, whether it's your relationships or your work environment, or if you're a worship leader like me, there are a lot of moments where trust trumps. Like, trust always wins, or a lack of trust always wins. And it's because in between the main moments of life are usually these no man's land of trust gaps. And I was watching a talk by Andy Stanley recently, and he was talking about this idea of trust. And it hit me really hard because I realized I have a lot of growth to do in this area, but also it was really encouraging because I felt like there were things that were very easy changes to make for my life that were going to help in so many areas of my life. So I'm just going to kind of process this with you. It's not going to be super well laid out probably, but it might, who knows, the method and all of that might lay it out really well. But here's the basic concept. If you promise to do something and then for some reason, maybe even through no fault of your own, you fail to follow through on that promise, what is my reaction going to be as someone who trusts you? And as human beings, we need to figure out how to navigate those gaps. Andy Stanley calls them trust gaps, where I promised to be on time and now I'm running late. So what are the people around me thinking in lieu of me being late? When I show up and when I finally do get there, right? When I finally do arrive, how are they all going to react? It's going to be a result of what they were believing about me while I was gone, while I wasn't there on time, right? And so one answer that people have is like, well, trust is something that needs to be built, and that's totally true. You can build trust by when you promise and you follow through on that promise, that over time, enough promises kept creates this, establishes a principle basically in your relationship that your promises are going to be followed through on. Let's say I'm late because my kid was playing tag the other day and outside, and then he hit another kid in the face with his face, and now he's got to go and get stitches, which actually happened this last week. That's a legitimate reason to be late for something. That's a very good reason to, not show up on time. And those things happen, right? Stuff that is legitimately outside of our control happens. So then it creates these gaps of trust where you have to fill in that gap with trust in order for the relationship to stay healthy. And so, what do you do in that situation? How do you react? So, I think one of the things that Andy Stanley said that was really, really good was, if you are someone who is needing to be trusted, one of the things that you can do is you can establish a rule in the relationship that says, in the times where there is a trust gap, you're going to hear from me first before you hear from anybody else. So let's go back to this example of, I'm running late, and it's because of a good reason, right? My response should be in that moment to contact whoever's waiting on me and say, you guys, I'm on my way. This happened. I am going to be running a little bit late. Rather than me waiting until somebody else fills everybody in, right? That creates trust. That helps them know, hey, I'm being communicated with. I'm figuring out what this person is doing while they're not here, right? But also, part of that is just establishing that rule in the beginning that I'm going to communicate you when there isn't, when this promise isn't being met. So that way, when I make a promise, you would inherently know that If you don't hear from me, that means that the promise is going to be fulfilled. If you do hear from me, we'll figure it out. And so that's something that I've been working on, honestly, is being more upfront rather than saying like, oh, I'm just hoping that this thing is going to work out, and then if it doesn't, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Rather than having to apologize on the back end, if it's something that I can head off at the pass and say like, hey, this is the state of things, this is where things are going, this is what's outside of my control and how I'm trying to fix the situation, but I'm just keeping everybody apprised and up to date at what's going on, rather than waiting until either it works and I'm like brushing off the sweat off my brow, or it fails and then I'm having to figure out how to break the bad news to somebody. Let's take it into a context that I'm really familiar with, which is worship leading, right? So let's say I make a promise that no matter what, we're going to have 8 musicians on stage so that way the stage doesn't feel empty, that we can make sure that everybody in the crowd is being led in worship well, because there's somebody to be able to focus kind of on them from the stage. And let's say that this weekend I have only got 7. And there are a few things that I can do to try to build trust. And one of those is being upfront about it and saying like, this is where we're at. I'm trying to resolve the situation, but I'm just giving you a heads up that if I'm unable to resolve the situation, that's all I could have really done, But it's better to be upfront and to share what's going on than to spring a bad surprise on somebody, is what I'm learning. And it's strange because you think that somebody you're working with would rather just not know the stressful details at all. But it helps them to be able to brace themselves for what's coming, so that there's not like an expectation and that expectation isn't met and it's like a surprise, expectation not met. It's more like expectation, I know what's going on enough to not be surprised at the end. Because unpleasant surprises can be really jarring and can really mess up somebody who is preparing for, say, a sermon or something like that. Now on the other side, trust goes both ways, right? And so it's not just the person who made the promise, who is trying to fulfill the promise, but there needs to be trust on my side that when I bring up this issue, or when I say like, hey, this is what's going to happen, or this is where the state of things are, hopefully this is all making sense. When I make a promise and when things aren't working, I have to trust that if I bring that up, that I'm not going to be met with hostility, I'm not going to be met with anger or whatever. And what I'm finding more often than not is that any perceptions or any assumptions that I make that if I bring up a problem, that there's going to be anger or whatever involved, they're completely in my head. And they're from, who knows, like bad experiences in school growing up, or mean bullies, or like just situations I didn't understand growing up where I felt like people were really mad at me, but they weren't. But they shape our thinking. And so I'm learning that people aren't upset. Like, that's the weird thing. You assume these things. You assume people are going to be upset when you say, here's what the problem is, and I'm working on trying to fix this. But they're not. They're not going to be upset. That's just what I'm learning. And as somebody who made a promise, and if it's not going to be able to be fulfilled like we made the promise, then we have to be upfront. We need to not worry so much what the outcome of that conversation is going to be, because it keeps us from being upfront. It forces us to try to stretch the truth to appease some hidden, latent anger that isn't there. And so that's kind of my thoughts for today, just about trust. Where have you guys found that you have trust gaps the most? How have you sought to fill those trust gaps so that way you're building trust, not degrading trust over time? Love to hear from you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Peace.